Mersea Island is a peaceful coastal area with traditional fishing community, but most importantly, it's a home for native oysters. I'm here at Mersea Island to talk to the 8th generation oysterman and find out how popular is this luxury food nowadays.
My family have been growing oysters on Mersea Island here in Essex for about 300 years now. So we sell oysters all around the UK, about 1.5 million oysters every year. And what we do is we grow oysters on seabed that we own, and we've been doing those methods for about 300 years. And my fifth great-grandfather, William Howard, first started selling oysters into London in the 1700s. And 8 generations later, we're still doing the same thing. So that's where some of our oysters grow. Those ones there, I've left there. We're not harvesting that bed at the moment. We're leaving that bed alone so the oysters can grow and become the best quality they can be. And then I'll start harvesting them in a couple of months' time from that bed there. So we've got about an acre there, and then I have another 14 acres about a 10-minute boat trip away, where we go hand picking most of the time. This stretch of water is really good quality, so you get grade A, grade B and grade C quality water in the UK, well in Europe. Grade A is like the cleanest, best water you can have, and you can pluck shellfish straight out of the sea of grade A and eat it straight away without having to do the whole purification process. Grade B, most of the UK is grade B, so that means you have to put it through purification, and then grade C is when you're not allowed to harvest. This stretch of water it fluctuates through a year like everything does, depending on rainfall and all this, but that's mainly grade A most of the time. We still purify oysters out of there, but the water quality there is really, really good. And this is all UV, these are all UV lights. So what the UV light does is it kills any harmful bacteria in the seawater, and then goes pumped up, and then the oysters filter that purified water, and that basically purifies the meat, purifies the oyster, cleans the oyster, gets rid of any impurities, and keeps them, makes sure they're safe to eat for human consumption. And this happens over 42 hours at least. And then we've got 2 lots of tanks here, and there's about 6,000, 7,000 oysters in each side. Tomorrow we'll sell all of them, so that's 6,000 oysters, 7,000 we'll sell tomorrow, and the next day we'll sell all of them. And then we reload the tanks, and then the next day sell all of them. So it's about 30,000 oysters a week that we're selling. I mean, I'm in contact with quite a lot of oyster farmers around the UK, and we've all said the same thing, is there's been like a renaissance of oysters over the past couple of years. Suddenly people are trying oysters and eating more oysters than ever before. We have been in a position, and we still are, where demand is kind of outstripping supply. We haven't been able to keep up with demand. I've had to turn potential new customers away because we just don't have the oysters available to sell to them on top of everything we're selling already. Something's happened where people have just grown a massive love for oysters again, which is fantastic. So the thing that's changed is the type of person that eats oysters now. I mean, in the 1980s and 1990s, oysters became very much food of the rich, and so you just see them mainly eaten in champagne bars and things like that. And the price was also really, really high. But now it's kind of changed where all demographics seem to be eating oysters now, so it's become much more of a universal food. So we wash our oysters here, and then they go over this grading machine. So this machine, there's a laser which senses the weight, and then as it goes over, it flicks them off according to their size, which makes it much more accurate for us. So this is the oyster the Romans discovered. You see that's the difference between the rock and the native. So a native oyster is firmer in texture, so it's more, I guess a native oyster more has the texture of like a rare steak, whereas a rock oyster is slightly softer, so it's got more of a texture of, say, a scallop. A rock oyster filters a lot more water as well, so it's a really active mollusk, so it filters about up to 100 litres of water a day, one rock oyster will, whereas a native oyster will filter about half that amount of water in a day. So a native oyster is much slower in growing, slower in filtering. It's quite a lazy oyster, whereas a rock oyster is kind of like kind of like it's got ADHD or something. So it just like has to just guzzle food constantly, you know. So they're quite different and also because a rock oyster filters so much water, it's a bit saltier as well. So it'll be a slightly more kind of salty flavour. And a native oyster has more zinc in it, so you'll get a bit more of a kind of a metallic kind of aftertaste when you eat a native oyster. So they are quite different in flavour profile. When you shuck an oyster, you just want a nice, whole, beautiful oyster. To get into the oyster, we always go in, well, depends where you're from in the world. So if you're British, you go in at the hinge of the oyster there. If you're Irish, you tend to go in at the side. And the French tend to open oysters from the other end. So I go in at the hinge of the oyster, and then you want to get your knife in so it's not going to move, and then it's literally twist and it cracks it open. Then I just wipe the blade so I don't get shell on the meat. And then there's two muscles that connect the meat. There's a muscle there and a muscle on the bottom that connects the shell to the meat. And what I do is you use the knife to disconnect from that muscle there, and then wipe away any shell that's on the lip, and then that oyster, you've got the main meat there, and this bit's the gills, what it uses for filtering, and then we just cut away from the other muscle, and then we tend to flip the oyster over for presentation. Oysters take a while to grow. They're a slow food. They take 3 years to get to maturity. So how much we sell at the moment is, for me, the maximum amount I think we can take to stay sustainable. We start doing more than that, we'll struggle to then A, keep up, and B, I think oyster stocks will struggle to keep up with how much we're taking from the sea. And that was the oyster industry's big mistake for many, many years, was overfishing. I don't think many oysters are as famous as the cultural oysters. I went to New Zealand for a few, in 2008, 2009 to work. Like, I was running a restaurant out there, and Kiwis had heard of oysters from Colchester, from Mersea. They'd heard of them. They knew about them. They're famous. It's just so that's as far away as you can get from here. So that's something that's quite special, really.
The significance of native oysters is undoubtful. They made Mersea Island popular all over the country from south till north. But the problem is that native oysters are growing so slow, and the demand is higher than their population. So what is awaiting oysters in the future? We will find out in the next episode.